There's fake news on a very large scale. There's disinformation that's going out of control. I think all of us feel this in different ways personally. I think every week I get forwards on WhatsApp from my own dad, which are probably of questionable provenance. I think all of us have folks in our lives who are sending us things that they probably shouldn't. But that's just one small slice of how things are changing. There's lots of incredible opportunity as well and broader questions at play here. For example, how do you find a balance between regulating some of these technologies while not killing innovation? And when tech competition is getting more heated, what will it take for countries, including the US and China, to find some common ground, maybe even try and establish some broad rules of the road, and is that even possible? Lucky to have a fantastic panel. Before I come to you, we are also very happy to be joined by Professor Zhang Tuosheng, who is in Beijing. I hope you can hear me. We are sad you couldn't make it here today, but I would like to begin with you. For a long time now, you have been writing about security issues and new technology and managing risk and managing these opportunities with a sense of moral responsibility. So could you begin by sharing with us what are some of the concerns that you have? Professor Zhang.
好，谢谢。我愿意就这个问题谈一点我的看法。AI 技术的发展将有力地推动全球经济社会的发展，并大大增加各国的军事能力，特别是指挥、控制、通讯、情报的能力。但另一方面，如对其使用不当、管控不好，则可能给人类社会带来重大挑战与风险。一是扩大数字鸿沟。数字鸿沟是随全球信息化发展，在信息富有者和信息贫困者之间出现的鸿沟。对于 AI 发展，如果管理不善，其有可能对低文化群体及老人群体带来歧视。昂贵的 AI 产品还可能将众多的低收入者拒之门外。更严重的是，由于目前 AI 技术主要掌握在少数国家、少数科技巨头手中，众多国家远远落在后面。上述情况可能加剧国家内部及国家之间的不平等。二是加剧虚假信息传播。近10年来，虚假信息传播随网络发展日益突出 ，AI 高速大量制作出真假难辨的图像、文本的能力，可能使虚假信息的传播更加猛烈。这不仅可能在国家内部造成严重社会混乱，给企业、民众造成巨大经济损失，而且可能在国际上加剧所谓的信息战、传媒战，造成国家间更大的误解误判，对国际关系带来严重危害。三是，若其被不理智的领导人使用，特别是被恐怖主义极端势力所利用，将带来极其严重的后果。二者都将降低军事冲突的门槛，并可能使冲突迅速升级。而如果有一天，核武发射指挥控制系统被恐怖主义势力通过 AI 技术侵入，产生的后果更将不堪设想。四是 AI 反哺为主 ，AI 具有极强的自我学习能力，从而具有发明力、创造力，这是其与历史上一切科技进步的最大不同之处。这不能不让人担心，如果有朝一日人类失去了对 AI 的控制，尤其是在军事使用上失去了对其控制，这将是人类社会最大的噩梦与灾难。为有效、安全地发挥 AI 技术的效力，国际社会、各国政府、AI 科技公司必须未雨绸缪，共同努力，在确保 AI 持续发展、服务于人类共同利益的同时，严控其可能带来的挑战与风险。
Chris, if I can come to you, I think that's very valid issues and concern has flagged. And I think one question that kind of gets to the heart of regulation is, do you think big tech companies on their own are doing enough to integrate ethics into how they function? And if not, what do you think is the way forward for governments to kind of deal with that?
Well, I don't think that big tech companies are, and it's not really their fault because it's the way the system is designed. The system is designed to reward profits. And regulation and this ethics overlay in the short term can certainly hurt profits. So that causes a divergence in interest. So I don't think they're doing enough. I think if you look objectively, a lot of them have dismantled some of their ethics boards and panels and things like this. A lot of experts have criticized them for not doing enough. So there seems to be some evidence in the intellectual community that they're not doing enough. There seems to be some overt evidence that they are dismantling some of these programs. And then I think if you look at some of the harm to society, every day or every week, I think I get something in my news feed about some poor, generally younger man who's just graduated college that's disassociated from his family, spending time in front of a screen, and really is having a life with AI that is reinforcing these negative thoughts and ends up committing suicide. So I think there needs to be a way to confront this. I'm not a huge AI expert, so whenever I don't know what to say, I always go back to my grandfather, because at least it'll be an interesting story. But my grandfather was confronted with a very similar problem with biological weapons in the late 1960s, and was one of the first things he did when he became president. He said, we should ban testing biological weapons, experimenting with biological weapons, not because the United States can't be trusted, but just because there's certain things the world shouldn't know. AI has some characteristics, not all of AI, but certain pieces of AI have some characteristics of that, where there needs to be some government role where it steps in and says, this is something that we shouldn't learn because the ramifications could be so difficult. And so, I think that there is a role for government to step in. I also think that there's a role for the legal system to step in. I think in certain obvious cases where, people commit suicide and it's clearly the result of being egged on by AI, well, there should be responsibility for that in the law. And then I think that there's other things that these big tech companies can be encouraged to do. I think if you look at how airplanes are made, there are audit committees that examine, new structures for aircrafts and, determine their airworthiness and things like that are independent, aren't profit-focused. I think that AI companies could adopt that model potentially as a way to avoid some of the harms that are caused by the race for profits.
Absolutely. And in terms of how China is dealing with this, Professor Wang Dong, if I could get you in first, in terms of balancing act of how Beijing is regulating its big tech companies, which it has been doing, while still ensuring that China remains innovative. We'd love to hear a little bit about how you see that being done.
Sure. Thank you, Ananth. I think the real question here is really not that whether or not we should regulate big techs, but rather how we do it. I think we should do it in a way that reduces risks, but also at the same time without stifling the very ecosystem that fuels innovation. So I think three things are very important. Number one, I think we should regulate systems and behaviors rather than targeting specific companies. So this means we should concentrate on the high-risk applications, the market dominance, and data misuse. In practice, this approach would also involve risk-based obligations, ensuring algorithmic transparency for systems with very big social significance, and creating strong safeguards around data safety and privacy. Second, I think it's very important to combine what I will call hard guardrails and soft ones. Hard guardrails would involve very clear prohibitions, including those against discrimination, very severe privacy violations, etc. But soft guardrails will refer to the adaptable mechanisms, such as regulatory sandboxes, safety assessments, and a standard that could evolve alongside technology. Finally, I think it's very important that we must integrate regulation within an innovation strategy rather than sort of position it as opposing force. So we should focus on fostering open collaboration, interoperability, and supporting AI infrastructure and talent to ensure innovation is inclusive and widely accessible.
Kind of taking a step back from AI to US and China, Professor Lampton, these new technologies and innovation, it's always being framed as competition, as a race. But do you see areas or examples where it's not just competition or a race, but where there's space for both of them to work together and find ways to work together?
Issues, but there's an older set of issues that raise this question of ethics, technology, regulating competition, and that's space, and space cooperation or not. And I think it raises many of the issues that we're talking about, but is something we've had decades of experience dealing with, and frankly, we're retrogressing now, and I think this is becoming a zone rather than cooperative zone, increasingly becoming a conflictual zone. So I just wanted to talk a couple of minutes about that. I'm worried about the breakdown in our space regulatory regime that's really been growing and developing since the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. And China, it's a zone at this moment where there's a mix of competition and contention, but China agreed to the Outer Space Treaty to be bound by it in 1983. So we're talking about a regime of rules that tries to prevent the militarization of space. It tries to prohibit claims for sovereignty over celestial bodies. It also regulates debris that may end up in space and threaten vehicles, as just recently happened to the Tiangong spaceship of China, and so on. So it's a treaty that's regulating real things, but I fear it's breaking down. What's breaking it down? Partly are now the increasing commercial potentials of space exploration. Rare minerals, zero gravity manufacturing, all sorts of things we can dream about with economic value. And as that competition for economic growth grows, our competition in space is growing. And you'll note that Elon Musk has a program, as NASA does, to reach Mars and the moon by 2030, 2040, and his t-shirts emblazoned "Occupy Mars," right? Now, whether you take it literally or not, you can ask Elon Musk, but there is that kind of dynamic. And President Trump also has issued an executive order that pertains to the commercial exploitation of celestial bodies. The keystone, it seems to me, is that since 1999, the United States, under law, has been prohibited from cooperating with China in space. So we have a statutory prohibition and political fear to cooperate in this area. Now, it seems to me that the core values that are at risk are really, how do we continue to adhere to the values of space as a zone of peace and is the common property of mankind? Will the next American to land on the moon and potentially Mars in the next couple of decades, will they claim these territories they land on as part of the United States? Or conversely, China's on the same kind of rough time schedule. How will China treat these issues? So it seems to me these are the core values that are at stake. There are a number of problems. When you say don't militarize space, what are weapons? Most things have both positive and negative potential depending on how you use them. Where does space begin for these purposes? Lower orbit, more distant travel, and so forth. How do we verify any agreements that we make? But I guess I just want to wind up by saying, we are moving our earthly conflicts into the galaxy. This is what's happening. And how do we regulate this? And it's in our interest, all of our interests, to regulate this. But even my own government prohibits us talking about it in any serious fashion. So as we're preoccupied with AI, let's not forget the galaxy. Thank you.
Well, I think space, it seems we are far way off from having any kind of global governance or global norms. But on the AI front, just recently at the APEC summit, you had President Xi propose a World Artificial Intelligence Cooperation Organization. We don't know how that's going to go forward or take shape. But Professor Zhang, Tuosheng, if I could bring you back in on this, do you think it's feasible to have this kind of world governance body for AI? And what are some of the issues do you think that it needs to address or regulate? Yeah, Professor Zhang.
我认为这个习主席提出的建议呢，是一个非常重要的一个倡议，是值得我们共同努力的一个长远目标。当然了，要在近期内就马上实现是不容易的。就像这个 WTO 吧，它的前身是 GATT。当时呢它是47年就建立了，但是 WTO 的建立直到95年才实现。当时有一个背景，有40年的冷战。我觉得我们现在的环境，我们现在还没有进入新的冷战，所以我们做出这样的努力，争取实现目标，应该可以快一点。那么我想一些具体的建议呢，就是为了朝向这个目标去走，我们可以一步步的来做。首先，第一点呢，各国中央政府、有关部门及行业协会要尽快的建立完善关于 AI 技术发展与应用的法规，在促进 AI 发展，使之广泛应用于社会各个领域的同时，要确保其包容性、普遍性、公平性，使文化水平、经济收入低的群体及老年人群体，使国内发展较为落后的地区不受歧视，同样受益。第二点，各国的 AI 法规对防止与应对 AI 技术可能带来的安全风险要有明确条款，对制造虚假信息造成重大影响与损失的组织与个人，应依法严惩不贷。对利用 AI 进行诈骗、盗窃等犯罪活动，更需严厉打击。各级政府及执法机构均应设立对 AI 的专职负责部门，开展严格执法检查。有关部门如果失察、失责，亦应受到法规的惩戒。各国的军工、军事部门需根据国家法规的原则，对 AI 技术的应用进行更加严格的管理。第三，在国际上要以联合国为主导，制定相关法规，确保全球 AI 发展安全、可靠、可控，并始终运行在公平向善的轨道上。对于在 AI 发展与利用上严重违反国际法的国家、组织、企业以至个人，要有严惩，要有惩罚和制裁等法律规定。各国及各地区制定的法规在总体上应与联合国颁布的国际法相一致，但可根据发展与文化上的差别，保持一定的独立性。第四，国内与国际法都应对 AI 企业，尤其是 AI 巨头需承担的责任、义务制定明确法律条款， AI 企业应努力成为 AI 技术与应用的主要推动者、AI 法规制定与完善的重要参与者与模范执行者，以及 AI 治理的首要责任者与合作者。第五，建议联合国成立一个类似国际原子能机构的人工智能国际协作机构。这个可以先做一步建立起这个全球的 AI 这个组织呢，那是一个长远目标。近年来，联合国为在全球范围内协调人工智能治理，以最大限度地发挥其效益，同时有效管理相关风险，已经做出积极努力。联合国建立人工智能国际协作机构，可能更有力地汇集其各所属机构的力量，对生成式人工智能治理的4个主要领域——和平与安全、侵犯人权、危害民主、破坏科学和公共机构起到重大推动作用。其组成应包括各国政治领袖、技术专家、外交官与管理者。第六，对于 AI 等新技术的军事应用，尤其是在大规模杀伤性武器方面的应用，必须慎之又慎。联合国大会裁军与国际安全委员会、5合国对话、裁军谈判会议等相关国际机构与机制，需就此加强研讨。世界主要国家亦需对此开展军事安全对话，争取早日使 AI 军事应用相关国际法规出台、生效并发挥重要作用。这应是联合国主导的 AI 国际法规中一个特别重要的组成部分。最后一点，世界科技大国应在全球人工智能治理中发挥带头作用。中美双方应落实好两国元首在2024年秘鲁利马举行会晤时达成的2大共识：一是共同应对人工智能系统的风险，提升人工智能安全性，加强国际合作，促进人工智能向善普惠；二是应维持由人类控制核武器使用的决定，认真考虑潜在风险，本着慎重负责的态度，在军事领域发展人工智能技术。为此，双方应尽快恢复中美人工智能政府间对话，还应考虑在将来可能开展的中美战略稳定对话中，将 AI 军事应用作为对话的一个重要组成部分。总之，世界各国关于 AI 的新社会契约及其在 AI 世界中的信任与合作，只能也必须建立在法治建设和多边对话的基础上。中国愿与世界各国共同为此做出持久不懈的努力。
Thank you, Professor Zhang. Chris, I thought there were 2 interesting points that he made. One being something along the lines of a IAEA that's needed when it comes to AI, and the second being the US and China needing to take the lead, which is very, very hard to see at this point of time. But what's your sense of some of the challenges you see in at least beginning a conversation of having some shared rules of the road?
You know, it's, there's so many options of who can lead, and there's so many problems with each of one. Oh, sorry, Mike. Sorry. There's so many options of who can lead, but then so many issues with those options. So, you know, definitely the U.S. and China have to be involved as the 2 leaders of AI. But the problem is what I referred to in my speech. There's a lack of trust between the 2 countries. So, you know, when whoever has this lead in AI, that can become insurmountable. The other country is going to be subordinated. And so there's a lot of incentive for countries to cheat. You know, there's a lot of mistrust as to why one side will propose something and the other side, you know, what's the other side trying to do to subordinate, you know, the other side. So I think that there's a trust issue between those 2. So then when you look for other options, You say, well, what about the UN? I mean, that seems to be the default. Everyone's kind of a member of the UN. Let's go to the UN. The problem with that is the U.S. is withdrawing, in a sense, from the UN, and that's certainly under assault with this administration. And then, the UN, it's hard to get things done. You need to build a big consensus, and that can be difficult. And then you can say, well, the EU is really good at bureaucracy. Let's go to them. But the problem is they don't have the same capabilities that the US and China has. So I think there's a lot of problems as it pertains to who's going to lead. But I think the professor hit on some really important points. I think one is that if we can focus on a couple specific areas where we both agree, this goes back to Henry Kissinger's maxim, that China and the US operate best when they have mutual interests. And I think the professor pointed out an area of mutual interest, which is in nuclear weapons. I think that's an area where the US and China can get together and work together and lead the world, and that would be a very positive thing. I think another area, my specialty is in biotech, and I think very clearly with bioweapons and developing bioweapons, that's another obvious area where the US and China should work together to limit the influence of AI. There is no good that will come out of having AI go off and develop bioweapons that are easy to replicate, that can be spread around the world. So I think if we can pick a few specific areas like that, then I think there can be a lot of cooperation. And then I think, the professor and others have alluded to this. There's an importance of verification with AI as well. With AI, it's a software program. It's not like a nuclear weapon. A nuclear weapon, you can have an IAE that examines nuclear weapons and development of nuclear weapons because it takes a long time to build. Nuclear material is, you can trace it, you can see where it came from, it has a signature to it. So, there's a lot of potential for verification, whereas a software program can be developed anywhere in the world and can be sent to anywhere in the world. So a country can appear to be abiding by an agreement, when in reality, an ally far away is designing something with software that benefits either China or the US. So, I think that verification program is something that needs to be given a lot of thought as well, which is very difficult with AI. But, I do think that it is in the interest of both China and the US to work on these. And again, if we can promote that through dialogue, I think that we can come to a good place where at least we can start to have a conversation about China and the US leading, because it is both of those countries together that need to lead.
No, absolutely. But I think as you flag trust being an issue, Professor Lampton, is finding areas of mutual interest, perhaps when you have this obvious huge lack of trust and maybe divergences in how they approach these issues?
Right. I think there's a kind of analysis going around, at least in the United States, but maybe more globally, is that engagement, US-China engagement and technological openness and mutual reassurance about our common interest in each other's development, this is certainly, it seems to me, breaking down. And what we need is a sort of, I think, a bi-national commission that would look at the record of engagement and quantify and specify the dimensions in which we made major gains. Because I think we'll be incentivized to be more cooperative if we can see gains. And I think we're right now in a national frame of mind of looking at all the downsides of past cooperation without recognizing all of the cooperative gains we made. I mean, economics and trade, there were downsides, but there were big upsides. Cancer research, for instance, big gains on that. So I think we ought to make a concerted effort to remind people what cooperation, it's not just a feel-good kind of liberal proclivity. It's an absolute necessity that brings results. So bilateral commission of wise people to kind of specify would be one thing. I think the other thing is our two national strategies, and I'll speak to the verbiage of the United States national strategy, and it went from late Obama through Biden and Trump. So it's in a way a bipartisan strategy. The way we've put it is China is the principal long-term threat to American interests and values. And I believe that if we could see with clarity China's core strategic values or policy statements internal, they'd say pretty much the same thing. We've each defined the other as our principal long-term problem. Well, we're not going to cooperate as long as that's the core strategy of each of our countries. So I think there's some rumor that the United States is going to change the focus somewhat of its strategic documents. I don't know if that's true. I don't know when it'll happen. I don't know if it'll be implemented. But we are not going to make the progress we need to unless we change our strategic orientation.
Professor Wang Dong, would you agree with that assessment that as long as the strategic thinking on now, it's going to be very difficult to do that? Or on the other hand, do you see some space where they can come together?
Sure. I would say that I actually agree with Professor Lampton. I think, if we look at the China-US relations, of course, it's extremely complex relationship right now. I think what the two presidents did in the Busan summit, from what I see, is precisely what Professor Lampton just noted. At the very strategic level, I think the two leaders actually, they at least, I think, hinted at, they tried to communicate in a very specific way about how to really conceptualize the relative positions of China and the United States in this world system. For instance, President Donald Trump mentioned this idea of G2. I understand it could be a bit of controversial back in the United States. But President Xi also, I think, in his conversation with President Trump, I think mentioned very clearly the idea that the great rejuvenation of the Chinese people should go hand in hand with the Make America Great Again idea. So meaning at the core, what the visions of the two countries, they are not contradictory to each other. At the core. I think this is an extremely important point. Just as what Professor Lampton, what Mike, you just noted. So is the strategic orientation actually is dictated by your strategic, certain way, your belief of your own strategic vision along vis-a-vis your, the other size strategic vision. So if you see these two things as zero-sum, they are contradictory to each other, then of course you end up in a zero-sum game. But if we argue that no, China is actually, Chinese great rejuvenation of Chinese people doesn't have to be premised on the downfall of American power, then it immediately become another story. So I think I fully agree with that, Mike's assessment that both sides, I think we have to think really seriously, very seriously about our strategic vision, our strategic orientation. What exactly, and lastly, I would argue that there are actually a lot of misperceptions involved, partly, because psychological process, but also partly because domestic, sentiment, emotions, even history, culture, a lot of elements actually go into that process. But I think these are the extremely essential fundamental issues we have to address if we want to get this relation right in this century.
I think as we kind of wrap up, I think in the morning, Chairman Zhao civic and constructive. So I'd love to hear from all three of you here. We've already had, I think, some interesting specific suggestions from the three of you in terms of things that could be done. I like the idea that you said of a commission. I don't know if we'll see that happen, but I like that idea. Yeah. I haven't heard that before. But maybe starting with you, Professor Wang Dong, specific areas that you think would at least be a starting point given this huge gulf in trust.
This is, of course, a very broad question. I think so. We, upon the layers of already, I think, lack of trust, we now having this AI competition between China and the United States. But I would argue that I try to frame it in this way. So competition in performance is healthy. Competition in safety and inclusiveness is essential. But competition in weaponization and exclusion is dangerous. So I think what we should do that we should strive to push competition toward the first two categories. We should call for open, fair, and efficient governance mechanism and oppose forming exclusive blocks. So we should treat AI as a, international public goods that really truly benefits the whole humanity, and call for joint action to seize AI opportunities while also ensuring safety, controllability, and fairness, including, I think, very important through the UN process and the support for Global South. I think, and of course, we have to be honest and realistic, right? We have to acknowledge some degree of strategic rivalry is sort of unavoidable. It would always be there. But I think we still have agency in shaping what kind of rivalry it is. So if we can accept that no country can monopolize AI, and instead we should strive to provide safer, more inclusive, and more development-friendly systems, then I think competition itself can become the source of global public goods rather than a driver of fragmentation.
Professor Lampton?
Well, I think you conceptually ended this with a very good note, talking about what is the nature of our competition against this assumption we will compete. And of course, if you're a capitalist, is to end competition, but it should be to shape the character of that competition.
Right.
And one form of competition is you start at a starting block, the gun goes off and everyone stays in their lane and the fastest person wins. That's productive competition. Everybody's exerting to do their best. There's another kind, the gun, you get at the starting block, gun goes off, and I try to trip the guy or gal in the next lane.
Shoot at you.
Yeah. That's the third form that we try to take each other out. And I think we're going down the two least productive dimensions of competition now, and we got to try to get in that first form of competition.
I think that before I come to you, Chris, I think it's obviously not a China-US issue as well. It's as someone from a country outside of this dynamic. I mean, there's a huge concern we heard in the previous panel as well, of being forced to choose sides. A while ago, India's foreign minister was asked which side India would choose, and he said India already had made up its mind and it would choose India's side, which is a nice turn of phrase, but doesn't pan out that way. So some final thoughts for you, since obviously I think it doesn't suit the rest of the world either to be in this position.
Yeah, I think that the competition for the rest of the world is difficult. And, you look at a country that's smaller, that's in Africa or something like that, and it's trying to make up its mind which way to go. And I think it's a very difficult decision, and it's just an unfortunate side effect of the competition. And, India obviously is a large country, and, where they come into play is going to be very important in terms of tipping the balance in this region. So, I think that this competition does put countries in an awkward place. But, unfortunately, the nature of competition is that, unfortunately, these countries will have to make a choice to some degree. India, of course, can have maybe a little more autonomy because of its size and its economic power and things like that. And it can play both sides, and maybe even Russia's side and a bunch of different sides to benefit India. And that's what you would expect. But, I think I have, in terms of, an answer to your previous question, we focus so much on the negative control. Let's stop development of AI with nuclear weapons. Let's stop development of biological weapons, negative controls on things. Maybe we could also look for an area where we could have positive encouragement for both China and the US to compete over things, and that could benefit the world, and I think that's in biotech. So if we have competition with AI and biotech, I think the faster that either China or the United States can come up with a cure for an illness like cancer or something, this is just going to benefit the world. And whether it's China that discovers it or the US, and whether AI is involved or not involved, we should be doing everything we can, whether that's encouraging investment, encouraging cross-border transactions, encouraging use of AI. We should make that a model for maybe how we can focus on other areas to use AI collaboratively between China and the United States. So I just maybe want to end my thoughts with a positive area where China and the United States can work together, as opposed to areas where we can focus on restraining what we do with AI.
I think that's a great place to end. So please join me in thanking the panel here, and also Professor Zhang, Tuosheng. Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Please say